In 2019, Avengers Endgame premiered, Toy Story 4 also hit the big screen, and that same year we would learn about the first documented case of COVID. However, if we go back a few months, something new was about to take shape in the wrestling industry. And for almost 2 decades after the disappearance of WCW, there was only one major company in the United States if you wanted to enjoy a large-scale wrestling product. And for a while, it seemed like that situation was going to last forever, but then something happened. In 2019, a completely new promotion was born. But how did the inaugural year of this new company unfold? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today, so make yourself comfortable because today I'll get straight to the point and present to you what happened in AEW in 2019. Of course, if we really want to go back to the beginning, we have to go back to the years 2017 and 2018. Those were the years when 4 key events happened. The first of them took place on May 16, 2017, when the famous WWE Guy Twitter account tweeted Dave Meltzer asking him if there was any chance that a promotion outside of WWE could once again draw 10,000 people to an arena in North America. And given how things were at that time, Meltzer's answer was that it wasn't likely to happen anytime soon. That being said, Cody Rhodes, a member of the Bullet Club, didn't agree with this opinion and replied to Dave with a tweet of his own that basically said challenge accepted. Obviously, Cody's challenge wouldn't be immediate, since while this was being discussed, the second key event in the birth of AEW would take place when, at Wrestle Kingdom on January 4, 2018, the WrestleMania equivalent for New Japan Pro Wrestling, Chris Jericho made the jump to the land of the rising sun to face Kenny in a Battle of Winnipeg, Omega in the match that served as the show's co-main event. This turned out to be such an important event for the audience that it multiplied the sales of New Japan World, the company's streaming service in the United States, by 10. This was the first real sign that there was a strong market for an audience desperate for an alternative to what was happening in WWE. Even so, this wouldn't be enough to get things going just yet. The next step happened when, after months of planning, on September 1st, 2018, Cody Rhodes and the Young Bucks organized the biggest independent wrestling show in history, All In. A show that ended up selling more than 11,000 tickets. How did it manage to be so successful? Largely thanks to the cult following that the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega had built on the internet with their web series, Being the Elite. A series that, at the time, saw its t-shirts become bestsellers at Hot Topic stores. Given the success of this show, it only solidified what had already been proven with the match between Kenny Omega and Chris Jericho. At the beginning of the year, there was already a large enough fan base willing to tune in to a top-tier American wrestling product that wasn't WWE. But this still wouldn't have been enough to get things going without a very important factor, someone who had the money to fund such an operation. Fortunately, such a promoter existed in the form of Tony Khan, billionaire owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars and Fulham Football Club. And more importantly, a lifelong wrestling fan. It just so happened that Tony Khan had been present at All In, and he was the one who provided his private jet to bring Jericho to the show for a surprise appearance. Once he saw what was happening there, he realized that an opportunity had presented itself. All his life, Tony Khan had dreamed of running his own wrestling promotion, and now that there was potential money to be made with that idea, he was able to present it to his father, Shahid Khan, who eventually helped him get the project off the ground. After that, Tony Khan was able to start a conversation with Warner Brothers executive Kevin Riley at a party they both attended, where he convinced him that almost 2 decades after WCW stopped airing on the network, there were now many benefits to bringing wrestling back to TNT. So, while rumors began to circulate in the wrestling world about this new initiative, things were confirmed on January 1, 2019. A press conference was held in Jacksonville to announce the creation of All Elite Wrestling. And it wouldn't be just another indie promotion. No, it would be on a large scale, with a lot of money behind it and a 2-hour weekly primetime show on TNT called Dynamite. That being said, having the TV time and the money wouldn't have meant much if the roster wasn't there. But luckily for Tony Khan, this was the perfect time to start something like this, because Kenny Omega, Chris Jericho, and the man destined to be the main character of the company, Adam Page. Would they all be free agents at the same time? And they would be there to tell the world that they were going to be members of AEW from day one. Really, it was just a matter of waiting for things to get started, something that would take a few more months while the infrastructure was set up and venues were booked for the events. That meant the following months were spent waiting while the initial roster was completed, with wrestlers like NGF, Pac, SoCal Uncensored, Darby Allin, and the Lucha Brothers, Jack Perry, Sammy Guevara, Britt Baker, and many more. Finally, we arrived at AEW's inaugural show, Double or Nothing, on May 25th. It was here where things started off strong, as Tony Khan and the Elite laid out their statement of intent to create an alternative, with a show that would feature a much more sports-focused production, with a ranking system that ensured wins and losses mattered. As expected, Double or Nothing was a well-received show. It was met with an almost unanimous and very positive response. One that immediately made AEW feel like a big league promotion, with a card that included matches like the Young Bucks and the Lucha Brothers fighting for the UPREA World Tag Team Championships. Britt Baker defeating Awesome Kong, Kylie Ray, and Nyla Rose in a 4-way match. Women's division, Hangman Page winning the inaugural Casino Battle Royal after finally eliminating MJF, and in one of the best matches from the early days of All Elite Wrestling. Cody Rhodes and Dustin Rhodes had an extremely emotional and bloody match. Even so, none of these matches was the main event. That spot was reserved for the rematch from Wrestle Kingdom 12, the match that had served as one of the first sparks for the promotion, Chris Jericho versus Kenny Omega 2. Who would win this one? Well, that would be Jericho, but he wouldn't be left standing once the night was over, because in another example of momentum being on AEW's side, after the main event ended, Jon Moxley arrived to attack both men and announced that he was also All Elite. Yes, a man who had been WWE Champion just a few years earlier and who had been a top star in WWE as recently as a few months ago had made the jump to the competition. And this meant that as the year went on, Tony Khan would have an important weapon in his arsenal for the war that was coming. What war was this? The Wednesday Night Wars. The name given to the weekly battles between Dynamite and NXT, since once it was announced that the former would air every Wednesday on TNT starting in October, WWE's developmental brand moved to that same date to go head-to-head with them. Before getting there, however, there would be a couple more AEW shows to keep up the momentum in the meantime. These were free events with pay-per-view level quality that were streamed online. The first of these was Fyter Fest on June 29. After using online shows like Being the Elite to build the card, since Dynamite wasn't on the air yet, things started off with the Dragon Gate star, CIMA, defeating Christopher Daniels before Rio got a win of her own in a triple threat match against Nyla Rose and Yuka Sakazaki. Once that was over, 3 of the 4 pillars from the early days of IW had their first singles match that wasn't a battle royal in the promotion, when at NGF, Jungle Boy and Jimmy Havoc were defeated by Hammer. Then, Darby Allin went on to draw with Cody Rhodes in a 20-minute time limit match. That being said, none of these would be the main event of the show. There were actually 2 main events here. The officials saw the Elite defeat the Lucha Brothers and Laredo Kid in a trios match that ultimately set up a rematch for Triple Mania 27 a couple of months later. And then there was the unofficial one, an acknowledged honor, from the official rankings that saw Jon Moxley defeat Joey Janela in a singles match, to the trios match official rankings that saw Janela as a one-man show. Against AEW, Jon Moxley had his sights set on taking over the whole company in the only way he knew how. Through levels of wrestling then, there was the unofficial one, and even though he was a heel at that time, just like with Joey Janela in 1996, he looked so cool that it was hard for the fans to boo him. Although Moxley was popular here, he was never considered for the Lucha Brothers match. That match had already been decided before he showed up at the end of Double or Nothing. Because after winning the Casino Battle Royal at the start of the show, Adam Page became one of the top contenders. And by defeating Kenny Omega in the main event, Chris Jericho became the other. Before finding out which of these two would win their eventual showdown, and in the process become the first person to hold Jacksonville's top prize, there would be one more free show broadcast at a pay-per-view level. And it would be Fight for the Fallen on July 13th. What happened at this show? In what was promoted as a charity event to help victims of gun violence, Things started with MJF, Sammy Guevara, and Shawn Spears defeating Darby Allin, Jimmy Havoc, and Joey Janela in a trios match. Once this was over, Brandi Rhodes would highlight many of the weaknesses of All Elite Wrestling's early women's division during her boring match against Ali. That's right. While almost every aspect of AEW was praised in 2019 thanks to the company's goodwill and positive momentum, the women's division was criticized almost unanimously for being by far the weakest part of the show, feeling as if very little effort was put into it. Even so, the rest of the show would still manage to impress during the mid-card matches. Like Hangman Page's victory over Kip Sabian, the Lucha Brothers defeating SoCal Uncensored, and Kenny Omega coming out victorious in his singles match against Tima. And then of course there was the main event of the night, a tag team match for the first time in history featuring two pairs of brothers, the Young Bucks against the duo of Cody and Dustin Rhodes. Who won? It would be the Young Bucks, and this meant they would advance to the next round of the tournament to crown the inaugural AEW World Tag Team Champions, while the Rhodes brothers returned to singles competition. That's right, in addition to having a mini tournament to decide who would be the first AEW World Champion, there were also ongoing or upcoming tournaments to see who would win the AEW Men's and Women's Tag Team Championships. When All Out arrived, and in the process gave us the second pay-per-view event for All Elite Wrestling, both tournaments would continue. Yes, meanwhile, another 10,000 fans filled the Sears Center Arena. For an event that, based on the tens of thousands waiting in the virtual Ticketmaster queue the day tickets went on sale, probably could have filled a large stadium. They were able to see how Riho defeated Hikaru Shida in a singles match. Meanwhile, Nyla Rose eliminated Britt Baker at the end during a women's casino battle royal to ensure that they would be the two main contenders who would fight to become world champion in the debut episode. On the other hand, the Dark Order would defeat Best Friends to earn a first-round bye of the tag team title tournament. This ultimately served as preparation for the debut of Orange Cassidy. And these wouldn't be the only noteworthy moments during the event's card. Jimmy Havoc would defeat both Darby Allin and Joey Janela in a triple threat match. Cody Rhodes would quickly dispatch his former friend Shawn Spears, while the Lucha Brothers and the Young Bucks would once again face off in an Escalera de la Muerte ladder match for the Triple Tire Tobier World Tag Team Championships. And after Jon Moxley had to be pulled from the event at the last minute due to an injury, Pac would step in to take his place and score a surprising victory over Kenny Omega. What could top such an amazing lineup? There could only be one real option, the first ever one-on-one match between Chris Jericho and Adam Page to determine who would become the first AEW Men's World Champion. After a hard-fought battle that lasted nearly 30 minutes, it would be Y2J who emerged victorious here. Yes, Chris Jericho was now the top figure in All Elite Wrestling, and this move was made to help draw even more attention to the promotion during its early days. That said, there would be a small bump in the road. In one of the funniest stories in wrestling history, almost immediately after winning the title, Jericho would lose it when someone stole it from his limousine while he was dining at the Longhorn Steakhouse restaurant. Of course, the champion was able to play along with this by posting videos online calling for a worldwide investigation into the grand theft that had taken place, turning the whole thing into a joke. As the days went by, the belt would be recovered after being found by the Tallahassee police on the side of the road, suggesting that the person who had taken it got scared by the growing commotion surrounding the situation. In this way, when Dynamite finally debuted on October 2nd, the men's world title would once again be around the champion's waist as he began a rivalry with the Elite, forming his own faction around him. One that included Sammy Guevara, Proud and Powerful, and Jake Hager, which would be known as the Inner Circle. Basically, during the early days of Dynamite, this would be the rivalry around which the company was built. So much so that it was originally planned to conclude during what was supposed to be the original Blood and Guts match in the spring of the following year. But that wouldn't be the only thing that made it worth tuning in to TNT on Wednesday nights. No. Meanwhile, AEW was going to war with NXT and quickly pulling ahead of them. In terms of television ratings, other highlights of the show would include Riho becoming the inaugural AEW Women's World Champion on the debut edition of Dynamite by defeating Nyla Rose for the honor. We would also see Adam Page beginning his long journey through his downfall, redemption, and eventual Men's World title win. Wrestlers like MJF, Jack Perry, and Britt Baker getting early exposure, and Chris Jericho trying to elevate new talent on television shows with world title matches against Darby Allin and Scorpio Sky. Even if 2 hours of Dynamite each week weren't enough for fans, there was also AEW Dark, an exclusive YouTube show that aired every Tuesday and featured non-televised matches recorded before Dynamite was broadcast. Basically, what we're saying here is that there was a lot of content for anyone interested in what Tony Khan and the Elite were doing. In 2019, and based on the general sentiment of the wrestling community, there was a large percentage of fans excited about the product. Since in many ways, it felt like a breath of fresh air compared to the situation with the competition at that time. And that's even before we get to the men's tag team title tournament, a tournament that took place entirely in those first episodes of Dynamite where we saw highlights like Private Party surprising the Young Bucks in the first round. In the end, however, it wouldn't be Private Party who won it all. Instead, after defeating the Lucha Brothers in the final, SoCal Uncensored, specifically Scorpio Sky and Frankie Kazarian, would be the ones crowned as the inaugural tag team champions. That meant they would be holding the gold when Full Gear came on November 9, the last pay-per-view event of the year for All Elite Wrestling. There, they would defend the titles against the Lucha Brothers and Private Party in a three-way tag team match, a match they ultimately won. On the other hand, Proud and Powerful would secure a victory for the Inner Circle by defeating the Young Bucks. Hangman Page would get a victory against Pac, and Rio would successfully defend her Women's World title against Emi Sakura. As for the main event, just like with Fyter Fest, there would technically be two of them, one official and one unofficial. The reason for this was because one of them would be so violent that Tony Khan would have no choice but to refuse to sanction it within the storyline, which meant it would be another unsanctioned match. That's right, in one of the first examples of AEW raising brutality to levels that simply would never be seen in other North American promotions, Jon Moxley and Kenny Omega finally faced off one-on-one. By the time it was all over, it would be Moxley who managed to come out victorious. As for the other main event, the official one, well, it would be very different since instead of being about blood and guts, it would be about the Men's World title. Yes, it was here where Cody Rhodes challenged Chris Jericho for the gold with the added stipulation that if the American Nightmare didn't win the big title this time, he would never be able to challenge for it again. And in the end, that's what happened, because after his cornerman MJF threw in the towel while Cody was trapped in the Lion Tamare, the match was awarded to the champion. And that wouldn't be the end of Rhodes' misfortunes, because once the match was over, MJF would cement his heel turn by delivering a low blow to his mentor, instantly becoming the biggest villain in the promotion. And in the man who was clearly the apparent heir to the top spot, with the possible exception of Adam Page. It was Maxwell Jacob Friedman who felt like Tony Khan's secret weapon at this stage of the game. He was certainly helping them surpass NXT, since by that time, the Wednesday Night Wars were already turning into a one-horse race. And after gaining a new henchman in Wardlow, he was able to continue his ascent by winning the Dynamite Diamond Ring for the first of 5 times during the November 27 episode of Dynamite. If we look at the last Dynamite shows of the year, while Cody Rhodes was trying to provoke MJF into giving him a singles match, Kenny Omega would recover from his loss to Jon Moxley by starting an excellent TV rivalry with Pac. As for Moxley, he would set his sights on becoming the #1 contender for Chris Jericho's Men's World title, but not everything would go well in Jacksonville. Because even though 90% of what they did was very well received, there were still some persistent complaints from the fans. The main one was still the weak handling of the women's division, and then of course there was the Elite. You see, in an attempt to elevate others, the Elite had accumulated a lot of losses during those early days of AEW. As the year was coming to an end, some people were starting to feel frustrated about this, as they felt that it was actually becoming a negative thing for the whole company that the main babyface group was staying on the sidelines. This, combined with a rather infamous segment from the Dark Order on the December 18th edition of Dynamite, in which the heels destroyed the Elite to close the show. This made more people start tuning into NXT. In fact, so many people changed the channel that this would be the night when NXT beat AEW in the ratings. Obviously, even though 2019 had been a very strong start for the Jacksonville-based promotion, by the end of the year they suddenly found themselves at a turning point. But how would they be able to deal with this? Well, that would be a story for another video, because as a result of taking Christmas week off, the December 18th TV episode would mark the end of the road for All Elite Wrestling, as far as their first year was concerned. And while the entire journey since its creation had been truly successful, the ending was getting a bit difficult. However, the fans felt that everything that was happening was exactly what they wanted to see. Next year, new challenges and important changes would come to Tony Khan's company, so obviously you can't miss it. I'm Diego Aranas, I'll stop talking now and see you in 2020.